The flickering torchlight revealed a nightmare. Not just bones, but human remains, skulls split open, limbs gnawed clean, piled floor to ceiling in a hidden cave. Who could commit such atrocities? And for how long had this unimaginable horror been lurking unseen just off the well-trodden paths of the land? If you stumbled upon such a scene, would you freeze in terror or run for your life? Tell us in the comments below. And if you're drawn to the darkest corners of human history, hit that subscribe button for Host of Silence so you don't miss a single chilling story. To truly understand the origins of this unspeakable evil, we must rewind to 16th century Scotland, to a time when two outcasts sought refuge, only to forge a monstrous legacy. The relentless wind tore at the threadbare cloaks of Alexander Bean and Agnes Douglas as they fled the Scottish coast. It carried the brine of the North Sea and the chill of 1,000 whispered condemnations, a fitting accompaniment to their desperate flight. Behind them lay a lifetime of scorn and the acrid smoke of a witch hunt barely escaped. Accusations vibrated in the air, the phantom scent of burning kindling a constant reminder of their narrow escape. Alexander, broad-shouldered but gone from exhaustion, clutched Agnes's hand, a desperate anchor in a world turned against him. His usually defiant face was etched with raw, undisguised fear. "Are you certain, Agnes?" No one followed, not a single torch. His voice was hoarse from days of silence and cold. Agnes's eyes, once bright, now held the haunted flicker of a cornered animal. Her features were drawn, lips chapped. She shook her head, a tremor running through her slight frame. "The night swallowed us. They'll look on the moor, on the king's highway, not these cursed cliffs. No sane soul treads this path." Her whispered voice carried the rasp of exhaustion and deep resentment. Their flight was swift and brutal. Alexander, born to the earth, chafed under honest labor, preferring poaching snares to spades, earning village contempt as a shiftless ne'er-do-well. But Agnes bore the sharper malice. Her sharp tongue, refusal to conform, and talent for herbal remedies curdled into whispers of dark arts. The accusation came swiftly, fueled by superstition. Withered livestock, children's fevers, inexplicable storms, all laid at her feet, undeniable proof to terrified villagers. The elder, whose piety matched his cruelty, decreed her a witch. The mob ignited torches, faces twisted into grotesque masks. They fled under a moonless night, villagers' screams echoing, leaving burning peat and baying dogs. For days they walked, driven by pursuit, subsisting on bitter berries and scrawny birds caught in Alexander's snares. Each day brought fresh despair, each night deeper fear. They were pariahs, cast out, chased from society into the desolate wilderness. "We need shelter," Agnes coughed, her breath misting in the frigid air. "Somewhere they'll never look. Somewhere the sea will guard our secrets, swallow our tracks." Her gaze swept the jagged coastline, a tapestry of gray rock and churning foam. Alexander nodded, his gaze fixed on the bruised horizon where sky met ocean. They skirted well-trodden paths, opting for the treacherous, isolated coastal route. The sheer cliffs and ceaseless waves might deter pursuers. This wild land mirrored their desperate hearts, every step a battle against elements and exhaustion. They walked for what felt like an eternity, wind pushing them, waves lashing their faces. Hunger gnawed, threatening to consume their will. As light faded, casting long shadows across the desolate rocks, Alexander saw it. Nestled at the base of a towering cliff, its granite face scarred by wind and water, where high tide would swallow its entrance, was a vast, dark maw, a gaping portal carved by the ocean. It promised refuge. The entrance was narrow, easily overlooked, yet wide enough to admit them at ebbing tide. The air was cool, carrying an earthy scent mingled with brine. "A cave," Alexander breathed, a desperate plea. Hope flickered in his weary eyes. A true cave, Agnes, a place to truly hide. They waited, shivering, as the tide slowly receded, revealing seaweed-slicked rocks. The air within was damp, heavy with salt and stone, but still, mercifully still, away from the biting wind. They stumbled inside, footsteps echoing eerily in the vast darkness, swallowed by the cavern's immense silence. The cave stretched far beyond the dying light. Alexander fumbled for flint and steel, striking sparks until a small flame caught on dry seaweed. The feeble light pushed back darkness, revealing slick walls, ancient formations, and the vastness of their new sanctuary. It was terribly cold, the chill seeping into their bones, but it was shelter, safety. For now, for days, survival was brutal. They huddled for warmth, bodies aching, stomachs screaming. Alexander scavenged at low tide for mussels, crabs, and occasional fish. Agnes, despite weakness, gathered edible seaweeds and limpets. Constant dampness seeped into their bones. The isolation, though a shield, was a new torment. The cave's vast emptiness, the ocean's roar magnified their fears. They were utterly alone, cut off from humanity. One evening, a storm raged, trapping them. Their meager provisions dwindled to nothing. Hunger was a sharp, tearing agony. Agnes shivered violently, pale and drawn. "Alexander," she whispered, barely audible above the storm, "we cannot live like this. We will starve." Alexander stared into their flickering fire, its warmth doing little to penetrate the chill within him. He had faced hunger, but never this crushing certainty of death. Not with Agnes's life hanging in the balance. His mind, dulled by exhaustion and fear, churned with primal desperation. His moral compass spun wildly, pointing only to survival. He thought of the narrow track high above their cave, a desolate trail used by solitary travelers. He had seen it from a distance, a faint ribbon of hope and danger. To approach it risked exposure, discovery, the fate they fled. To remain meant certain death. The choice was stark. "There are others," he said, voice rough. "Travelers. On the path above." They passed close. Agnes looked at him, eyes widening, understanding dawning. The unspoken truth hung heavy. Robbery, violence, survival at any cost. Their moral lines blurred, dissolving under primal need. No longer just outcasts. They were animals backed into a corner, driven by the imperative to live, no matter the cost. The transformation accelerated. The decision was not spoken aloud. It solidified in Alexander's grim jaw, in Agnes's haunted, determined eyes. A silent, terrible pact, forged in starvation, fear, and the isolating darkness of their refuge. Days later, the storm passed. Alexander, face grim, scaled the treacherous cliff path. Agnes followed, trembling but resolute. They found a secluded ambush spot overlooking the trail, a narrow defile where the path hugged the cliff. They waited for hours, hidden amongst rocks and gorse, silence broken only by gulls and the distant ocean. Finally, a lone figure appeared, a stout merchant on horseback, saddlebags bulging, his cloak a stark contrast to their rags. He hummed a carefree tune, oblivious to the predatory eyes watching him from the shadows, to the two desperate souls whose existence now hung on his unsuspecting passage. Alexander's heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat of terror and grim determination. He felt cold dread, a sickening lurch, but also an exhilarating rush. This was it, the point of no return. As the merchant drew level, Alexander sprang from hiding, a blur of rags and desperation. He brandished a heavy driftwood club, swinging it with strength born of primal fear and suppressed rage. The merchant cried out, cut short as the club connected with a sickening thud. He crumpled from his horse, a heap of fine cloth and broken bones. Agnes, trembling, moved with horrifying efficiency. She instantly rifled through the merchant's pockets, stripping him of coin and valuables with practiced haste that chilled Alexander. Alexander, breath ragged, stared at the lifeless form, crimson pooling on the damp earth. The act was done. The line crossed. Nausea washed over him, quickly replaced by cold, practical assessment. They had to be quick, leave no trace. Every second linger was a risk. The horse, Agnes hissed, and the body, into the sea. Now, Alexander before someone comes. Alexander calmed the startled horse, leading it back. They quickly unloaded its saddlebags, dried meat bread, oats, ale, fine cloth, a treasure trove of survival. The gruesome task remained. With agonizing effort, they dragged the merchant's body to the cliff edge. The immense weight, the corpse's clamminess, spurred them on. With a final heave, they pushed it over. It tumbled, a dark silhouette, into the churning waves. The horse, too, was led to a hidden crevice, its neck quickly broken, its carcass pushed over. No horse, no rider, no trail, no evidence. They returned to the cave, laden with spoils, bodies trembling, minds reeling. The food was devoured with ravenous hunger, each bite a victory. The harsh ale offered brief, intoxicating reprieve, blurring their new reality. As days turned to weeks, then months, the shock of their first crime faded, replaced by chilling acceptance, a hardening of hearts. Hunger, fear of discovery, and the need for survival forged them into something monstrous. The isolated cave transformed into a permanent den. The coastal path became their hunting ground, a larder for insatiable needs. Alexander, with brute strength and cunning, became the ruthless hunter. Agnes, with her keen eye and practical mind, became the strategist, ensuring victims vanished without trace, belongings repurposed. Their flesh, under crushing desperation and isolation, consuming another human became a grim necessity, then an unspeakable habit. Fear of starvation was a more potent driver than any moral code. They were no longer Alexander Bean and Agnes Douglas, shunned outcasts. They were shadows, predators in the desolate corners of a land that cast them out. The transition was complete. The descent into a life without law, morality, or human compassion had begun. The dark heart of the cave beat with their new, terrible existence, echoing the wild Scottish coast. Their accomplice, provider, and gruesome prison. The sinister refuge had birthed monsters. Hunger shattered what little remained of their humanity. Fugitives, hounded by persecution and scarcity in the wild Scottish lands, Alexander and Agnes committed an unspeakable act, born from the most desperate necessity. The damp, heavy cave, their precarious refuge, seemed to crush them. That first meal in the flickering firelight etched itself into their souls like an indelible stain. Despite the revulsion, it was brutal subsistence. Violent nausea twisted their guts, but hunger drowned any lingering trace of morality. Every bite was torment and atrocious violation, but a dark victory against starvation. They survived, but at what cost? The metallic, nauseating taste lingered in their mouths, a reminder of the line they had crossed. Crouched in the damp darkness, burdened by their secret, they were forever changed. Their humanity, an empty shell. Days bled into months, and time eroded the memory of who they once were. The savage Scottish landscape offered little subsistence. Skeletal sheep, when found, yielded meager and unsatisfying meat, leaving them prey to hunger. Howling winds echoed the hollowness of their stomachs, a mournful chorus for their existence. The sea mocked them with its unreachable promise of food. Hunger and isolation gnawed at their former selves, layer by layer. Memories of law, decency, and civilized life dissolved into the mist of necessity. The initial horror faded, replaced by grim resignation and cold practicality. They were survivors, forced to unimaginable extremes. Forbidden flesh became subsistence, the only means to stave off death. What began as a desperate act evolved into mechanical efficiency. Their senses sharpened, turning predatory, tuned to the slightest sign of human life. Alexander ventured further, his steps silent. Agnes, swift and quiet, sometimes joined him, her eyes scanning the horizon with newfound hunger. They learned the rhythms of lone travelers, merchants, pilgrims, shepherds. They became ghosts of the mist, striking fast and silent, leaving no witnesses, only inexplicable absence. Victims were lured into traps, their fate sealed before they sensed danger. There was no joy in their acts, only cold, calculated precision. The struggle was brief, brutal, and the silence that followed was heavy with stolen life. Speaking of a new and terrible order, in the cave, butchering became a grim ritual, a macabre art honed by repetition and necessity. What was once repulsive transformed into a precise, near-surgical operation. Every part was used with relentless efficiency, nothing wasted. Tendons were dried into cords, bones crushed for marrow or scattered to leave no trace. The transformation from necessity to habit was insidious, almost imperceptible. Revulsion receded, replaced by cold pragmatism. Victims became provisions, meat, mere resources to be harvested. Killing was now more rewarding and predictable than hunting or fishing. The taste, once abhorrent, became tolerable, then palatable, silencing hunger with a disturbing effectiveness that verged on addiction. Disposal of remains was a macabre dance with detection. Scotland's tides and coastal inlets became silent accomplices to their crimes. Bones, stripped clean, were ground to dust or shattered, then tossed from cliffs or cast into the restless sea. Bloodied clothes and personal items were weighed down with stones and sunk, never to be seen again. At times, with chilling ingenuity, they dragged body parts inland, tearing and scattering them to mimic attacks by wild beasts like wolves or bears, feared legends in the highlands. Such tragedies raised little suspicion in these remote areas. They mastered the patterns of currents and tides, ensuring nothing traceable ever reached shore. Their cave, a labyrinth of passages and chambers, offered perfect concealment, its entrance hidden by waves or mist. They were ghosts, leaving behind only unexplained disappearances and an unsettling silence. Then, imperceptibly, a terrifying evolution began, marking their complete separation from humanity. The habit born from necessity transmuted into pleasure. It was a dark blooming within their corrupted souls, a garden of horrors and shadows. Perhaps it was the intoxicating power, the godlike control over life and death, or the liberating release from all social norms and judgment. In that wilderness, they were gods, rulers of their domain, unbound by law or consequence. Or perhaps, most disturbingly, it was a taste itself. No longer merely tolerable, it became terrifyingly irresistible, a forbidden fruit awakening an insatiable craving. The primal satisfaction of quenching hunger with the ultimate taboo surpassed mere survival. It became a twisted thrill, a dark ecstasy that eclipsed any repulsion. A grim contentment settled after each hunt, a beastly satisfaction. Their eyes, once haunted, now glowed with a disturbing gleam of predatory hunger, revealing the beast within. Their humanity had been devoured, not just metaphorically, but literally, leaving behind the raw essence of the predator. A chilling silence fell between them after each kill. Not remorse, but a mutual understanding, a dark complicity in the abomination that defined them. Absolute isolation warped their minds, shaping them into something unrecognizable. Years of seclusion deepened their detachment from the world of men until there was no return. No other voices, no other faces, pierced their abyssal solitude. The outside world became a distant concept, its rules and morals meaningless echoes from a life no longer theirs. They were Adam and Eve in a hellish garden. Their reality shrunk to the boundaries of the cave. Their bond, forged in terror and shared atrocity, twisted into something inseparable, devoid of affection or tenderness. It was a symbiosis of shared depravity, a union of monsters. Their bodies, the only tangible comfort, became refuge from loneliness, the sole source of warmth and touch. Uncontrollable impulses, ungoverned by shame or morality, found raw and unrestricted release. The line between familial roles, between permitted and forbidden, blurred and vanished, obliterated by isolation and depravity. Incest, once unthinkable, became a natural and inevitable consequence of their secluded existence. A primal act, born from desperate need for physical contact and erosion of moral boundaries. Another step in their dehumanization, a final, irrevocable break from civilized life. Agnes gave birth to their first child in the darkness of cave, a nameless boy, his cries echoing off the stone. He was theirs, a new mouth to feed, new eyes to witness their macabre rituals. Then came more, a relentless procession of births, swelling the family, turning the cave into a lair. Boys and girls, their features a wild blend of Alexander and Agnes, lean, strong, adapted to brutal life without comfort. The cave, once a den for two, became a teeming pit of savage life, echoing with guttural commands, the wet sound of flesh being torn and hoarse groans of insatiable hunger. The children grew quickly, feral and wild, their skin pale, their eyes sharp and hungry. They crawled through the dark passages of cave, their only light a torch. They knew no lullabies, only the endless roar of the sea and the shrill howl of wind through the cracks. No toys, only bleached bones of victims, gnawed and handled with eerie familiarity. They were raised with no language beyond grunts, no names, no concept of right or wrong. Civility and morality were alien ideas, empty words with no place in their world. Their universe was austere and brutal. The cave as home, the hunt as purpose, the feast as reward. Their parents taught them survival through violence, taking lives, consuming flesh as the only way to exist. They learned to stalk, kill, dismember, and devour raw meat without hesitation, for it was the only life they knew. Their senses, sharpened by necessity and the search for food, became tuned to the presence of travelers, the subtle scent of human flesh. They moved with predatory grace, lean, hardened bodies, sharp eyes that pierced the darkness. Born into perpetual hunger, they satisfied it with the only resource taught to them, the only sustenance available. As they grew, the older children joined the hunts, becoming apprentices in slaughter. They formed an efficient unit, a pack of human beasts, moving with terrifying unity and purpose. A lone traveler no longer stirred fear, but chilling anticipation, a gleam of predatory excitement. These children, nourished solely on human flesh, knew no other form of sustenance. It was their birthright, their macabre inheritance. They watched their parents with intense focus, imitating their actions precisely, absorbing their monstrous lessons. The cycle of violence and abomination was rooted in their being, passed down effortlessly, unquestioned. They were a family, yes, but devoid of kindness, compassion, or empathy, living like wild animals. Their humanity consumed, replaced by insatiable hunger. The cave echoed not with childish laughter, but with grunts of satisfaction, the wet sound of tearing flesh, bones being gnawed, and the haunting silence of a world forever lost. The legacy of Alexander and Agnes was a new and terrifying breed, born of starvation, nourished by depravity, bound of monstrous acts that defined their existence and sealed their fate. The mists of Ayrshire mirrored the growing dread that shrouded the land. For 28 long years, disappearances escalated into a roar of terror along the rugged Firth of Clyde. Deep within a vast cave system, a natural fortress hidden by treacherous tides and unforgiving landscape, the monstrous Bean family flourished. Their existence, a grotesque testament to depravity, had metastasized into a horrifying dynasty of 48 souls. A horrifying lineage of grandparents, parents, children, and grandchildren, all schooled from birth in their unspeakable, cannibalistic trade. Their survival depended entirely on their dark art, a gruesome economy of human flesh. They were a self-sustaining horror, a hidden cancer on the Scottish coast. Silent, efficient horrors, they moved through moonless nights in dense coastal fog, unseen as shifting tides. Their cave, an unholy sanctuary of damp stone, bore chilling testament to their reign. The air within was heavy with a metallic tang of blood, fresh and ancient, clinging to every damp surface. Meticulously cleaned bones adorned the walls like macabre trophies, glinting in the faint light. Ribs, femurs, skulls, silent monuments to lives brutally extinguished. Their methods evolved from crude ambushes into sophisticated traps, utilizing their knowledge of the land. They targeted lone travelers, fishermen, or even entire families, luring them into treacherous bogs, secluded coves, or narrow cliff paths. They were the shadows, travelers vanishing without a trace, leaving only chilling silence. Their larder, a cavernous chamber, was a gruesome pantry stocked with preserved flesh, ensuring sustenance and concealment from a world unaware of their existence. The sheer scale of their operation was as terrifying as its nature. Over 3 decades, the toll mounted horrifyingly. More than 1,000 souls vanished into the unforgiving landscape. Farmers, fishermen, peddlers, young lovers, pilgrims, all disappeared without a trace. Each absence was a festering wound in every village and family, a void that refused to heal. Homes stood empty, hearths cold. Livestock wandered untended, their mournful lowing the only sound from once bustling steadings. Crops withered in the fields, symbols of lives cut short, left to rot under the indifferent sky. The silence was deafening, an oppressive quietude replacing the vibrant hum of life with suffocating dread. Society began to unravel under the weight of this unseen terror. In communities along the Firth of Clyde, Girvan, Ballantrae, Mabel, and countless hamlets, insidious fear took root. It twisted daily life into gnawing apprehension. Roads, once arteries of trade, became dreaded pathways, whispered about. Travel ceased after dusk. By day, journeys were undertaken only in large, armed groups, faces grim, eyes scanning the horizon. Farmers dared not venture far, their fields shrinking as fear dictated boundaries. Fishermen hugged the coastline, sweeping cliffs and waters nervously, glancing with trepidation at every cave mouth. Mothers clutched children tighter, sweeping horizons with unspoken terror, lullabies turning into desperate prayers. Children's laughter, once common, became rare, cut short by anxious calls from worried parents. The air thickened with unspoken fear, a hum of anxiety permeating every interaction, every thought. Rumors, like smoke from a dying fire, curled through taverns and cottages, twisting and growing more monstrous with each whisper. Bandits were blamed, but vanishings left no trace, no struggle, no robbery, only eerie absence. Whispers of a monstrous beast, a vengeful spirit, or a curse began to circulate, offering no logical explanation, only deepening helplessness. Paranoia festered, eating community bonds like a virulent disease. Neighbors eyed neighbors with suspicion, trust eroded by the unknown. Strangers were met with hostile glares, their presence a potential harbinger of doom. Trust, once the bedrock of close-knit communities, frayed under unbearable strain. Even the kirk offered prayers tinged with desperation, sermons reflecting the despair of a populace abandoned by reason. Disappearances became the sole, grim topic, overshadowing births, marriages, and harvests. Villagers spoke of Hamish McIntyre, the blacksmith, Jamie the peddler, and the miller's lass, whose laughter was silenced forever. The list of the lost grew longer each week, a litany of sorrow and unanswered questions. A darkness, they felt, had swallowed folk whole, and no one knew how to fight it or what it was. Local authorities were outmatched. Investigations led only to dead ends. Search parties returned empty-handed, faces etched with despair. They scoured moors, forests, and cliffs, finding nothing but wind and gull cries. The volume of missing persons cases broke their meager resources, leaving them helpless. They offered no answers, only futility, their proclamations hollow against pervasive fear. Bounties were offered, but when unclaimed, the ghosts left no tracks, witnesses, or clues. Even the king's men from Edinburgh offered little more than empty promises and detached observations, doing nothing to quell the terror. Ayrshire felt abandoned, left to face an invisible enemy alone, its pleas for help unheard in the halls of power. Then the turning point. A gruesome whisper from the sea shattered the illusion of disappearance, replacing it with horrifying certainty. On a gray, blustery morning, a young boy scavenging for driftwood near Ballantrae stumbled upon it, humming a childish tune, oblivious of horrors. His foot nudged something soft yet firm in the wet sand. Half buried in the sand, slick with seaweed and brine, lay a human arm, undeniably human, severed cleanly above the elbow. It bore chilling gnawing marks not from marine life, but something else. His raw, primal screams, born of pure terror, echoed across the deserted beach, carrying a horror that would haunt villagers for years. Panic erupted, spreading like wildfire from Ballantrae through every hamlet and village. The arm was rushed to Dr. Alistair MacLeod, the local physician. His examination was meticulous, his face paling as he noted details. His verdict, delivered in a grave tone, sent shivers down spines. Recently severed. Human, not from beasts, not from the sea. Marks of deliberate, brutal acts. A blade, then something else. Something that tore at the flesh. News of the discovery, amplified by fear and morbid fascination, spread like a plague, igniting dread. The abstract terror of vanishing solidified into the horrifying reality of murder and mutilation, a tangible, visceral threat. More followed, each a fresh stab of horror, deepening the collective nightmare. A human leg, still clad in tartan, snagged in fishing nets off Girvan, its flesh pale and waterlogged, bone cleanly severed. A bloated torso, features unrecognizable, washed ashore near Lendlefoot. screaming of unimaginable cruelty and agonizing end. Fingers, a jawbone, a skull, macabre gifts from the waves, continued to appear regularly along the coastline, each a chilling piece of a puzzle no one wanted to solve. Each discovery fueled the terror, transforming creeping fear into screaming reality. These were not mere disappearances. These were murders, brutal dismemberments, acts of unimaginable barbarity, defying human understanding. The evidence pointed to a depravity so profound, so methodical, it seemed belonged to a nightmare. The findings eliminated doubt. This was human evil, methodical and precise. Fear intensified into collective hysteria, a suffocating blanket woven from dread and desperation covering the land. People barricaded doors, locked windows, and forbade children from straying. Roads, once dreaded, became deserted, save for occasional armed groups. Faces grim, eyes darting nervously into every shadow. Night became a crucible of anxious listening. Every creak, every rustle, every distant animal cry interpreted as a potential threat, a sign of unseen horror approaching. Sleep offered little respite. Haunted by nightmares of the sea's gruesome offerings, of dismembered bodies, and chilling marks that spoke of unspeakable hunger, public outrage surged, a furious tide demanding answers and justice. Petitions scrawled on parchment by trembling hands went to province and magistrates, begging intervention. Desperate pleas were dispatched to the king, begging for royal intervention against this unseen enemy. Communities, once fractured by suspicion, found a common enemy in the unseen perpetrator, their shared terror forging uneasy unity. But who? Why? The lack of motive was as disturbing as the acts, suggesting madness beyond reason, a hunger beyond comprehension. Theories multiplied. Dark witches, a madman with unholy hunger, a pact with the devil. Authorities, spurred by public outcry, intensified patrols. But the vast coastline, with its hidden caves and treacherous inlets, kept the perpetrator elusive. Search parties, larger and more determined, found only echoing silence, the land mocking their futile efforts, guarding its terrible secret. Fear became screaming terror, permeating life along the Ayrshire coast. The air felt heavy with anxiety and unspoken dread, a suffocating pall hanging over everything. Fishermen, dependent on the sea, dreaded each new cast of nets, fearing what horror the waves might yield. Children were kept strictly inland, laughter replaced by anxious, hushed tones of elders. Coastal life, once vibrant, muted into a grim, watchful existence. Fairs canceled, trade withered, ports fell silent, docks empty. The Bean family, hidden deep within their sanctuary, remained untouched, unseen, unheard. They were the architects of this terror. Thriving on the fear they had sown, their existence a perverse counterpoint to suffering above ground. The washed-up body parts, far from exposing them, only deepened the mystery, heightened dread, making the unseen enemy seem more monstrous, more supernatural. To them, distant cries of panic and the mournful roar of waves were merely background noise, a lullaby to their gruesome existence. The mystery remained terrifyingly unsolved, a gaping wound in Scotland's heart, bleeding fear into every corner. The true horror, unseen and unimagined, lay beyond human understanding and justice. The coast, once a symbol of freedom and bounty, had become a theater of suffering, awaiting a reckoning destined never to arrive. The air hung heavy and damp over the desolate coastal road. Thomas McGregor, a merchant, urged his weary horse onward, the cart creaking. Beside him, his wife Alara, pale in the fading light, clutched his arm. A cold premonition settled as twilight gave way to an ink-black night. "We should have stopped at the last village," Alara murmured, her voice a fragile whisper. "My heart feels heavy. Travelers vanish on these isolated paths." She shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. "Nonsense, my love," Thomas replied, though his heart fluttered. He tightened his grip on the reins, but the land's suffocating silence, broken only by distant waves, pressed in. The road narrowed to a precarious track between craggy outcrops. Every shadow deepened, every rustle held menace. From a hidden gully, wild, gaunt figures erupted. Not entirely men, they moved with unnatural swiftness. Their faces, a tapestry of inbreeding and feral hunger, held eyes glinting with unholy light, clutching crude weapons, gnarled clubs, rusted knives, jagged stones. They were upon him instantly, a nightmare made flesh. The horse screamed as a hulking shadow hamstrung it. The cart lurched, throwing Thomas against Alara. Before he could react, Alara was torn from his side. Her guttural cry of terror was stifled as she vanished into the mass of grotesque figures. Thomas scrambled, reeling, seeing only Alara's struggling form. Then the unspeakable horror began. He heard it. Tearing, wet sounds, the sickening squelch of flesh, the crack of bone. Through a haze of terror, he saw shapes bending over her, crude and ravenous. They were not merely killing her. They were consuming her, gnawing at her flesh with depraved relish. His wife, Alara, reduced to a feast for abominations. The metallic stench of hot blood filled the air, mingling with the reek of unwashed bodies and something ancient, fetid, like a charnel house. Paralysis seized him, forcing him to witness the ultimate desecration. The figures grunted with bestial satisfaction, tearing, ripping, their faces smeared with gore, eyes alight with unholy joy. A single thought pierced the horror. Asterisk run. Now, before they turn on you, asterisk. Primal instinct took over. A hulking brute, larger than the others, turned, a piece of Alara's red shawl dangling from his blood-soaked grasp. Their eyes met. Thomas saw not just hunger, but chilling malevolence. As the brute lumbered towards him, Thomas found his legs. He scrambled over the overturned cart, heedless of pain, his mind screaming, asterisk faster. Move! Asterisk he ran blindly, stumbling, falling, picking himself up. The guttural sounds of their gruesome feast echoed behind him. He did not look back. The image, sounds, and smell were seared into his mind, an eternal torment. He ran until his lungs burned, driven by a terror colder than the night. He ran for hours, away from that horror, away from where Alara had been consumed. His clothes were rags, his body bruised and bleeding, but physical pain was a distant echo compared to the torment within his shattered soul. He was a ghost, a man utterly broken. Days later, a gaunt, wild-eyed figure, barely sane, stumbled into Edinburgh. His story, a tale of unspeakable cannibalism and monstrous fiends, quickly reached King James I. The king, known for his keen intellect and concern for his subjects, initially dismissed it as the ravings of a madman. "He speaks of monsters, your majesty," Lord Campbell, a trusted adviser, reported, his face pale. "Of a woman devoured by creatures human in form, yet utterly devoid of humanity. Feral, bestial, yet cunning." James stroked his beard, brow furrowed. "Devoured, you say? Not merely slain for coin? This is a new villainy, if true, a plague upon my land." He considered the man's desperate, broken state, the raw terror in his eyes. This was no common lunatic. "Bring him to me," the king commanded firmly. "Treat him with care, but let him not leave until I have heard his full account." Thomas McGregor, unrecognizable, was led before the king. His clothes were blood-stained rags, his face haggard, eyes hollow. He knelt, trembling, a broken man. "Rise, man," James said gently. "Tell me your tale. Every detail, no matter how foul. Hold nothing back." Thomas recounted the horror, his voice gaining terrible strength as memories poured forth. He described the brutal ambush, the attacker's primitive savagery, the sickening sounds of tearing flesh and cracking bone, and the unspeakable sight of Alara's body being torn apart. He spoke of the reeking stench, their chilling indifference, and their primal hunger. He omitted nothing, detailing their unnatural speed and grotesque deformities. The king listened, his expression hardening with each detail. Advisors shifted uneasily, some gagging as the horror unfolded. A profound silence fell over the chamber, broken only by Thomas's ragged sobs as he collapsed, utterly spent. "By God's teeth!" James bellowed, slamming his fist down. "This is not mere banditry. This is an abomination, a blight upon Scotland. These are not men, but devils. They must be rooted out, every last one, to the gallows, then to the fire. No mercy for such fiends." His eyes blazed with righteous fury. His command was swift and absolute. "Lord Campbell," he roared, "gather a full regiment, every able-bodied man, every seasoned soldier. Send for the finest tracking hounds. These creatures cannot roam free, preying on my subjects. They have defiled humanity itself." Within hours, the royal decree echoed. A massive force of over 400 armed men, including the king's elite guard and Highland warriors, assembled with unprecedented speed. Swords were sharpened, armor donned, provisions gathered. King James, his resolve unshakable, declared he would lead the expedition himself. The tale of the cannibal clan spread like wildfire, igniting fear, revulsion, and outrage across the kingdom. The pursuit began with relentless intensity, led by the traumatized Thomas, who found grim purpose in guiding them. The massive company moved towards the desolate western coast. Tracking hounds, straining at their leashes, their low growls a deep thrum, followed the faint, lingering scent of decay, fear, and something indescribably foul. The terrain was unforgiving. Treacherous boglands, dense thickets, and a biting sea wind. Days blurred into a tireless march against the elements and growing dread. Soldiers, initially skeptical, felt the land's oppressive weight, a creeping unease. They found no clear trail, only scattered bone fragments. The unnerving silence of birds and absence of small game hinted otherwise. The air grew heavier, colder, laden with unspoken menace. The king, a formidable presence, urged them onward, his resolve hardening. He knew these creatures, if they existed, were masters of concealment, preying for generations. Their calculated cruelty and depravity filled him with cold, righteous fury. He would not rest until this blight was purged. Finally, after nearly a week, the hounds changed. Their low growls intensified, pulling fiercely towards towering cliffs rising from the sea, a labyrinth of dark sea caves. The air grew heavy, thick, with a foul, sickeningly sweet stench that made stomachs churn. "Here, your majesty!" a lead handler cried, struggling with his frantic hound. "The scent is overwhelming." The king dismounted swiftly, drawing his sword. "Fan out, cautiously. These are not common bandits. These are something else entirely." The soldiers spread out, weapons drawn, faces grim. The cove was a natural amphitheater. At its rear, partially obscured by rocks, was a narrow, unassuming opening, a dark slit from which the putrid smell emanated with suffocating force. "This is it," Thomas whispered, his face ashen. "The evil is here. I can feel it." King James nodded, jaw set, eyes narrowed. "Light the torches. We go in. Expose this darkness." The first men to enter recoiled, gagging, torches flickering. The king pushed past them. The vast cavern's contents shocked even hardened soldiers. In the flickering light, a charnel house of unimaginable horror was revealed. Towering piles of human bones rose from the damp floor, some stained with ancient blood. Skulls, many cracked open from marrow, stared out. Severed limbs hung from hooks. Curing like meat, their flesh shriveled. Pools of clotted blood, mixed with human viscera, scattered amidst the bones. Crude barrels held foul-smelling brine, their contents revealed as pickled human remains. The air was thick, suffocating, with the unbearable stench of death, decay, and old blood, a smell that clung to everything. Soldiers, hardened by battles, stood frozen, faces contorted in revulsion, some vomiting. Others stared, their minds shattered by the scene's depravity, eyes wide with horror. "My God!" Lord Campbell whispered hoarsely. "They are cannibals. The terrible legends, they are true." King James stood unmoving amidst the chaos, cold fury replacing horror. His eyes, wide with chilling realization, reflected gruesome evidence of a clan that had preyed on humans for generations. Crude tools fashioned from bone, flint knives, and goods crafted from human remains, necklaces of teeth, skull bowls, lay scattered, the scale of their atrocities sickening beyond belief. "This is the lair of the Bean family," an older, grizzled soldier muttered, trembling. The legends, they were true all along. The king turned to his stunned men, his gaze igniting righteous fury within them. "No quarter," he roared, his voice echoing to the charnel cave. "Hunt them down, every man, woman, and child of this abominable clan. Let none escape. For Scotland, for humanity, these fiends must be purged. The profound horror of the cave fueled their resolve, turning revulsion into burning hatred. The hunt had begun, not for brigands, but for monsters. The discovery of the Bean family's lair was not an end, but the terrifying beginning of a brutal, merciless reckoning. The air in the cavern, thick with the stench of decay and something far more sickening, shattered with the sudden intrusion of light and steel. King James's elite guard, led by the steadfast Sir Robert and the relentless Captain Douglas, flooded the subterranean lair. They had expected monsters, but not this. Not 48 souls, a twisted tapestry of generations, all bearing the same vacant, predatory gaze. The capture was swift, brutal, and met not with resistance born of fear, but of an almost animalistic confusion. The Beans, from the wizened Alexander and his gaunt wife, to their countless progeny, sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, great-grandchildren, all interbred, all unnaturally pale and gaunt, seemed incapable of grasping the concept of their capture. They snarled, they bit, but it was the snarl of a cornered beast, not the desperate plea of a human facing judgment. Their eyes held no terror, only a chilling, primal fury at the disruption of their grotesque existence. They were bound, chained, and dragged from the cave, blinking in the harsh daylight, their skin unaccustomed to the sun's embrace. The sight of them, a ragged, unkempt horde, elicited gasps and cries of outrage from the assembled villagers and the soldiers who had tracked them. The true horror was not just their numbers, nor their appearance, but the palpable aura of their crimes that clung to them like the mire on their tattered clothes. They smelled of blood, of fear, of untold atrocities. The journey to Edinburgh was a macabre procession. Carts laden with the chain beans trundled slowly along the rugged Scottish roads, flanked by a double escort of pikemen and horsemen. News of the capture had spread like wildfire, drawing crowds at every village square, every crossroads. People lined the routes, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, profound revulsion, and vengeful fury. They hurled stones, curses, and anything they could lay their hands on. Yet the Beans remained impassive. Their faces, thin and sharp-featured, betrayed no shame, no fear, no remorse. When a particularly large stone struck one of the younger women, she merely blinked a slow, reptilian movement, and then fixed her gaze on the throw with an expression of cold, unblinking hatred that sent shivers down the spine. It was the look of a predator denied its prey, not a human enduring punishment. King James VI, a man of law and order, had decreed that such monsters, whose crimes defied all human understanding and precedent, would not be afforded the dignity of a formal trial. Their guilt was self-evident, etched into the very fabric of their being, confirmed by the horrifying trove discovered within their cave. Piles of discarded bones, human remains, the grisly evidence of their unspeakable feasts. There was no argument to be made, no defense to be mounted, for creatures who had lived outside the very bounds of humanity. The site chosen for their execution was Leith Sands, a vast expanse near the sea, a place where the winds carried away the cries and the tides washed away the stains. It was a public spectacle, decreed by the king not merely as punishment, but as a visceral warning, a purification for a land so defiled. Scaffolds were erected, simple wooden structures, stark against the gray Scottish sky. Thousands gathered, a silent, grim multitude, drawn by a mixture of terror and a desperate need for closure. The air was heavy with anticipation, with the collective grief of a nation that had for too long suffered under a hidden terror. The executions began with the men. Alexander Bean, his gaunt frame still radiating a perverse, unyielding defiance, was brought forth first. He was bound to a stake, his eyes scanning the crowd with an unnerving calm, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his thin lips. He looked not at the king's men, nor at the executioner, but at the women and children of his family, who had been placed in a semicircle before the scaffolds, forced to witness the grim proceedings. Their faces, though pale, mirrored his own lack of emotion, a chilling testament to the depth of their shared depravity. The executioner, a burly man whose face was etched with grim resolve, began his work. The instruments were simple, brutal, a large cleaver, a hammer. Alexander's limbs were severed, one by one, the bone-chilling thud of the blade echoing across the sands, followed by the sickening crunch of bone. A collective gasp rippled to the crowd with each stroke, But from the beings, there was only silence. No screams of agony from Alexander, only a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of his being. He bled out slowly, his life draining onto the sand, his eyes fixed on his wife, a faint, almost victorious gleam in them. Then came the others. Each man, in turn, was subjected to the same gruesome fate. Their bodies were dismembered, their blood staining the sands, a horrifying tableau of justice meted out without mercy. The air grew thick with a metallic tang of blood, the low murmurs of the crowd, and the chilling silence of the beings awaiting their turn. Even as their fathers, brothers, and sons were reduced to mangled heaps, the women and children showed no tears, no pleas, no sign of human empathy. Their faces remained masks of cold indifference, their eyes wide and unblinking, absorbing the horror as if it were a natural, inevitable part of their world. It was this absolute, unshakable lack of remorse, this profound absence of human feeling, that truly terrified the witnesses. It stripped away any pretense of shared humanity, revealing them as an alien, monstrous species. Finally, it was the turn of the women and the children. They were not to be dismembered, for their crimes, while equally monstrous, were perceived differently in the eyes of the law. But their punishment was no less final. They were led to a massive pyre, constructed from dry wood and pitch, already smoking. As the torch was applied, the flames eagerly licked at the base, rising quickly. The heat intensified, and a low hum of fear finally began to ripple through the being women. For the first time, a flicker of something akin to terror crossed their faces, not at their own impending doom, but perhaps at the realization that their twisted lineage, their perverse existence, was truly at an end. Alexander Bean's wife, the matriarch of this abhorrent clan, was the last to be forced onto the pyre. Her eyes, which had remained cold throughout the dismemberment of her male kin, now darted wildly, not in a plea for mercy, but in a desperate search for something, anything, that might continue their line. As the flames began to engulf her, consuming her tattered clothes, she let out a shriek, not of pain, but of a chilling, primal rage. It was a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the air, echoing the defiance of her husband. But it was Alexander Bean, moments before his own life finally ebbed, his body a ruin, who delivered the final, chilling pronouncement. His voice, a ragged whisper torn from a throat filled with blood, somehow carried across the hushed sands, piercing the collective consciousness of the horrified onlookers. His eyes, still alight with unnatural intensity, found the king's men, found the crowd, found the sky itself. "It's not over," he rasped, a faint, horrifying smile stretching his lips. "It will never be over." And so it was done. The 48 souls of the Bean family, a cancerous growth in the heart of Scotland, were extinguished. The fires died down. The tide came in, washing away the last stains of blood from the sands. A profound silence descended upon the land, a silence born not of peace, but a deep, unsettling unease. Yet Alexander's dying curse, his chilling prophecy, proved to be more than just the ravings of a dying monster. The story of the Bean family, of their unspeakable crimes and their gruesome end, spread like a plague wind across Scotland and beyond. It was whispered in taverns, recounted by flickering hearth fires, woven into a fabric of cautionary tales told to restless children. The details, already horrific, grew with each retelling, embellished and exaggerated, transforming the Beans from mere criminals into mythical figures of unadulterated evil. The fear they had instilled did not vanish with their deaths. Instead, it mutated, taking on a new, insidious form. People spoke of the Bean seed, of the possibility that some distant unknown relative, perhaps a child spirited away before the capture, or a survivor of some forgotten branch, might still lurk in the remote glens and shadowed forests. Every isolated incident, every disappearance in the wild, untamed parts of the Highlands, was attributed to them. The rustle of leaves in a dark wood, the unsettling silence of a forgotten cave, the glint of an eye in the deepening twilight, all became potential signs of their continued existence. For centuries, the legend of the Bean family persisted, a dark stain on the soul of Scotland. They became the embodiment of the primal fear of the unknown, the monstrous lurking just beyond the edge of civilization. Their story, a testament to humanity's capacity for unimaginable depravity and its enduring struggle against it, echoed through the ages, a chilling reminder that some horrors, once unleashed, truly never die. It's not over. It will never be over. Alexander Bean's final words became a chilling mantra, a prophecy fulfilled in the enduring terror of his name. The myth of the Beans, a macabre tapestry woven from truth and terror, continued to haunt the Scottish imagination, an eternal whisper of the darkness that could lie hidden, even in the most beautiful of lands. The echoes of 16th century Scotland remind us that while the landscapes and loyalties have changed, the fundamental human drama remains eternal. It is a story of choices made under duress, of the quiet strength found in the face of overwhelming odds, and the profound, often tragic, consequences of loyalty and ambition. These lives, lived centuries ago amidst the mists and rugged peaks, whisper not just of history, but of the universal resilience of the human spirit. They speak to the enduring struggle for dignity, the relentless pursuit of survival, and the bittersweet glimmer of hope that, even in the darkest of times, refuse to be extinguished. What strikes you most about the human experience in such a challenging era? Share your reflections in the comments below. And if this journey into the heart of history resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that bring the past to life.